videos that I'm going to be doing that hopefully will bring all of us up to speed and on the same page with some of the key concepts that are in the Shadow and Light program. Some of us have been through sessions with me before, so you know some of the language of emergence and keepers, breakers, benders, and inclusivity, and others don't know that. So I want to do a series of refreshers for those of you who know, and new work for those of you who may not. The first one is going to be on emergence and on emergent systems. And when you're looking at this, I hope you will be thinking about and remembering Rupert Sheldrake's work on morphogenetic fields. I'll be doing a primer on that also. When you put these two concepts together, I think something very interesting comes out in terms of how we're thinking about systems and structures and how we're thinking about changing them. So let's get on with the information about emergence and emergent systems. When we start thinking about systems and structures, we start thinking about how systems are organized. Most of us exist in several different kinds of systems and structures. Our schools, our jobs, our church, all these things are organized in various ways. So the idea of emergence is just another way for us to organize human systems and structures. This way is just being understood now, just being comprehended, and we get to start thinking about how systems and structures organize. We start thinking about how we can be impacted in a very different way simply because we organize our lives and our systems in a different way. Most of us are familiar with one of two different kinds of systems. Either a centralized system, we also call these command and control systems or top-down systems, or decentralized, where there may be several different small centralizations, small areas where that with some degree of autonomy. Most of us are not familiar and don't have experience with an emergent system, which is what we'll be talking about today. So the technical definition for emergence or an emergent system is: emergent systems are complex adaptive systems that operate from low-level rules yet display high-level sophistication. An emergent system is when a collection of individuals start to behave as a single entity. Okay, well that's the definition. What does that actually mean? Another way of thinking about an emergent system is a leaderless distributed network. A network where there is no identified leader giving commands and giving orders, and identified followers taking those commands and taking those orders. Now, all of us have experience in seeing in nature an emergent system. Emergent systems are bee colonies, are ant colonies. They are when this amazing mass or collection of beings comes together and starts acting for the common good and starts acting across the differences they may have with each other, with each individual actor. And so we see that in this case, hundreds, thousands, even millions of actors can come together without any leader. Okay, so here's a trivia question. What is the largest living being in terms of its weight? And a hint is that it weighs 3 times more than an elephant, so it's not an elephant. The trick here is largest living being. The largest living being in terms of weight is a termite mound. A termite mound is huge. If you took all the termites out of the mound, by weight, they would weigh 3 times more than an elephant. Now, the interesting thing from our point of view of emergence is, how do all of these beings actually govern themselves and create an amazingly complex organism, an amazingly organized space with no leader? Most of us are more familiar with beehives or ant colonies. When we were in school, we were taught that the beehive or the ant colony was run by the queen. So the queen was the largest and the strongest, and she basically would tell all the other bees or all the other ants what to do. The problem with this idea or this theory is that the queen has the least amount of information of any of the bees or any of the ants. She's been locked underground for years, sometimes decades. She doesn't even see sunlight, let alone being able to organize the complex operations of building the hive, building the colony, building the termite mound, taking care of the young, growing the food. Most of these animals don't eat, termites don't eat wood. They use the wood to grow special mushrooms that they do eat. And so all these beings are operating with amazing degrees of sophistication, but very, very few directions, and no directions coming from the queen. So this gets us to our first real understanding of emergence. Whether it's ants or bees or termites, individuals who are unable to assess the global situation still work together in a coordinated way, and they manage to do it using only local information. Seeing the whole is both a perceptual and conceptual impossibility for any member of these emergent species. The queen cannot see the whole, but neither can any of the workers, neither can any of the other bees, neither can the foragers. Each one is operating with intensely local information, and together they manage an amazing global network. So, how do they do it? Well, according to those who have been studying emergence, they say that individual agents pay attention to their immediate neighbors rather than wait for orders from above. They think locally and act locally, but their collective action produces a global behavior. Basically what they're saying is, by an ant paying attention only to the ants all around it, or a bee paying attention only to the other bees around it, they manage to act in a way that produces a beneficial global behavior. Now, this is what we can see them doing. The part of this that we cannot see them doing is the morphogenetic field in which each one of those agents or each one of those actors is acting. That's the place where when we start looking at changing an overall organism or changing the overall pattern of a society, when we start looking at how individuals pick up on our local neighbors and how individuals are impacted by the morphogenetic field in which they're living, those are the things that start to influence how we look at global ant behavior and also perhaps global human behavior. So, emergent systems are leaderless in the traditional sense of a leader in control of the organization or the system. We don't look at the queen bee as in charge of the beehive. You don't look at the queen ant as in charge of the ant colony. And when we start looking at this, we start seeing that there's actual benefit to not having a leader in control of an organization or a system. But one of the benefits being, in most organizations that are command and control or top-down organizations, all you have to do is kill the leader or take the leader out or buy the leader off, and the entire organization changes. What happens if you have an emergent system? If the organization is actually held by all of these beings together, and there's no leader in charge or in control, then that makes the organization amazingly resilient. And if what the workers or the agents are doing is working for their own local benefit, paying attention to all of the local actors and achieving a global result, then what we wind up doing is creating an amazingly resilient system, a system that can react very well to changes in its environment in a very short period of time. So here we get to the meat of the matter, or the tofu of the matter, depending on your choices. What are the characteristics of an emergent system? There are 5 characteristics. If you have these 5 characteristics, the possibility of emergence occurs. If you don't have these 5 characteristics, you don't have an emergence. Number 1, a large number of independent actors, all of them sharing relevant information. A lack of control over any individual's behavior. The actors have a common set of simple values or simple rules. The actors share a common set of largely interchangeable roles. And the actors share common goals and objectives. Now, when you have these 5 elements present, something begins to emerge. Now, another way of looking at this, and this gets us back to the information on morphogenetic fields, that if you have these 5 factors, what begins to emerge is the possibility of an overarching morphogenetic field. What begins to happen is that a field starts to coalesce. Now, you will remember me saying that this is the problem that Occupy had, in that they missed on several of these key points. The question is whether they had a large enough set of actors. But even if they did, even if the hundreds that they had in each of the occupations was a large enough set, they did not have shared objectives. They did not have shared rules. And by shared rules, it's not like somebody from the top is imposing a rule to the bottom. It's that all of us agree that these are going to be our rules. And we're going to agree that these are our rules because we also share a common set of objectives. I don't think that the Occupy folks had a common set of objectives. They had a common view of what they did not want. That will not create a living organization. That will not create an emergence. What we need in this situation is a common view of what it is that we do want, a positive vision. So this is why you recognize that I keep stressing what is our common goal. Our common meta vision is a world for all. Our commonly held primary value being inclusivity. And from these things, we can start looking at how do we get the right number of actors? How do we interchange our roles and things like that? So why is this important? From the work of Stephen Johnson and others, they say with these 5 characteristics, very large numbers of individuals can act together in very complex ways to achieve amazing results. The system itself learns, grows, develops, and adapts, even though the individuals themselves may not be, and generally cannot be, aware of the overall conditions of the system. I want to stress the opposite of this, that without these 5 characteristics, it doesn't matter how large the number of individuals there are, they're not going to act together in complex ways without a top-down leadership. And the system doesn't learn. The leaders might learn. There may be some records kept, but the system doesn't learn the way that it does when an emergence takes place, when you have a group of beings that are acting in concert with each other. Okay, so let's look at some examples of what we're talking about in terms of centralized, decentralized, and emergent systems. This pattern is very typical of what a centralized system looks like. You have a lot of different actors all feeding information into a central hub, and decisions are made from the point of view of the centralized hub. A lot of times this works, and it works fine. Other times it doesn't work, and it doesn't work in profound ways. For example, when you need to share local information, how does a small group of local actors actually share information? Well, they have to feed that information into the centralized hub. The centralized hub has to make sense of the information and then has to feed that information back down to the other actors. Well, this gets to be not only incredibly inefficient, but actually bizarre in its outcomes when it's applied in the real world. It reminds me of a situation that happened right here in Portland some years ago. Those of us in Portland will remember the situation where we had a very strange snowfall, and then there was an ice storm on top of the snowfall, and so the people whose job it is to clear the streets had no way of this is an unanticipated situation. They didn't have experience in how to clean these particular streets. So what they were doing, what the people on the street were doing, were making up the rules as they were going along. The problem was that truck A had a radio in it, but the radio was only hooked into the centralized dispatcher at headquarters. He needed to be able to talk to truck B, but there was no system set up where the trucks could talk directly to each other. So the headquarters was getting these strange strange messages saying, somebody tell truck B to back up 2 feet. Now, truck B knows what that meant, but the people at headquarters, that was completely irrelevant, useless information, and there's an unnecessary step that they would have to go through trying to basically be a mouthpiece for truck A. This happens over and over again, especially when systems come up to new and unusual events, things that don't normally happen in our ordinary lives. So there are times when, and unfortunately a lot of times, when a centralized system simply gets in your way. Okay, so if a centralized system doesn't work, how about a decentralized system, where you have a headquarters, but you also have these local distribution networks of some kind, or local decision-making networks. This means that a local decision can be made relatively efficiently and you don't have to refer everything up to the headquarters level. Um, this is a much more efficient system than a centralized system, and it's a little bit more resilient when it comes to dealing with new situations. However, what happens when this is the local system? When the local system consists of more than one distribution point. At that point, the system becomes even more complex than with a, um, a centralized system, because you've got two more managers or two more deciders that are in the loop. And so this system becomes uh, even more unwieldy when a new situation comes up, meaning this is a different group of actors that needs to share information, and when a new territory comes up where the local group isn't quite what you thought it was going to be. And so this shows that both centralized and decentralized systems can be problematic. So let's take a look at the same dots that are tied into an emergent system. This time they're not tied into either a centralized system where all of them are pointing in the same direction, or even a decentralized system where they're all pointing to one or more hubs. They're all pointing to their neighbors, and by being in contact with their neighbors, if they are sharing information, now remember, the sharing of the information is really, really critical to an emergent system. If they're sharing local information, that information will percolate throughout the system. And as that information percolates throughout the system, it will be remembered by those for whom it is relevant, and it will not be remembered for if it's irrelevant information, it will not percolate through the system. So the emergent system is based on local and relevant information. If I don't need to know a particular thing in an emergent system, I won't know it. But the system itself knows it, and the system itself learns and grows in this way. In this way, it's less efficient in terms of getting bullet-like information from a commander to the field. But it's a lot more information in terms of looking at how systems evolve, grow, and especially how they adapt to local conditions. So here's another Stephen Johnson quote. Understanding emergence has always been about giving up control, letting the system govern itself as much as possible, letting it learn from the footprints. This is something that each one of us has experience with, where we can see how a system can emerge if you're just paying attention to what people are doing and what people are saying. An example of this, I was taking my walk today, and there's a concrete path, and there's also a dirt path where people and their dogs who are walking in this park will walk on the dirt path and not on the concrete path. Well, the concrete path was laid out by someone sitting in an office looking at a map saying the sidewalk should go this way, and not looking at how regular human beings and other organisms actually use the space. There's a famous incident of this at a college that was building a new campus, and they got the architects in and they designed the buildings, and when they're looking at the buildings, they're saying, well, where are the pathways to get from one building to another? And the architect said, we're not putting any in. We're going to actually just put grass in, and then we're going to look at how the grass gets worn down, and we're going to put our paths in that way. And this was a relatively bold move on the part of the architects to be able to convince the college to do this, because we're so used to being in control and trying to answer all the questions. And I have to say that I'm one of the chief offenders for that. And so what they did was they built the buildings, put grass down, and they had people walking the grass, getting from one building to another. And after a month or two, it was absolutely clear that certain paths had been worn between one building and another building. But other buildings had no grass worn at all, so it was not important to put a path to that building. Or you could put a small path, but not a really large one, because you're not making a large investment of time and energy in that path. And so it really is about being comfortable with letting go of control and being comfortable in learning as you go along. So, what is the role of a leader in an emergent system? Each one of you is being trained right now in how to be a new kind of leader in a new kind of system. If we were learning how to be leaders in a command and control system, you'd be learning how to take orders, maybe march up and down and learn how to salute and things like that. But in an emergent system, we have specific roles and specific characteristics for those, and I don't like using the word leader. I prefer using the word catalyst for those of us who act as catalysts within a new, emergent, and evolving system. So what are some of the characteristics of these leaders or these catalysts in the new system? Here, Stephen Johnson is speaking again. He says, without an active leader who takes responsibility for building a network, spontaneous connection between groups emerge very slowly or not at all. Now, I agree with that. And our job is to enhance the possibility for building those connections. Now, I slightly disagree with Stephen, or I should say I would enhance what he says with the spontaneous connection appears to grow very quickly when you have large numbers of actors. And I'm thinking in particular about the people power revolutions that were sweeping Eastern Europe back in the 90s. When you had large numbers of people coming together, 1 million people coming together in Wenceslas Square in Prague, 1.5 million people in the Central Square in Beirut, Lebanon, 1 million people in Kiev in the Ukraine. When you get a large group of people like that, it takes on a life of its own, and that life is even more important and more powerful than that of the leaders that the so-called leaders that try to organize it. The organizing principles of an emergence happens at that level. I'll talk more about that a little bit later. So, what are the roles of an emergent leader or an emergent catalyst leader? Number one, encourage or stimulate lots of actors. The role of the leader is to help obtain critical mass, to get enough people involved. How many is enough? Depends on the task. In some instances, 4 or 5 people may be enough. In other instances, 200 or 300 people may not be enough. So it really depends a lot on the task. Number 2, to articulate simple, consistent rules. Number 3, to articulate simple, deep values and goals. Number 4, to articulate simple, appropriate roles. And number 5, and the most important one, is to take no direct command and control, to actually curb one's enthusiasm around the idea of being in control. It's very easy for people to want to put the emergent leader in a position of control before the emergence happens. Once the emergence happens, you don't have to worry about that. People will do as Lao Tzu says in the Tao Te Ching. When the people act, they say, "We did it ourselves." And Lao Tzu is actually talking about a more emergent style of leadership where the leader is unseen, unheard of, and is taking no real control over a situation and no real control over people. So this becomes a very fluid and dynamic way of looking at leadership, and a very ego-less way of looking at leadership. If you need an ego stroke, this is not the way to get one. So with these rules, with these roles, I should say, for the emergent leader, we can see some very amazing things emerge from that. So again, Stephen Johnson, an ant colony without local rules has no chance of creating a higher level order, no chance of creating a collective intelligence. And again, I go back to the example, lots of examples of lots of demonstrations, but I particularly call out the Occupy example because it was a long-term, long-standing involvement. Compared to some examples I'm going to give you after the next slide, you'll see what happens when you have a large group of people operating with simple, consistent rules, and a large group of people operating without a set of simple, consistent rules, and see what the different different outcomes are. So, I definitely know that that each one of the 5 elements, but especially the one about rules, about common vision, and common goals. You don't have those, you don't have an emergence. Johnson identifies 4 different levels of emergent systems. In the first level, people would be working in an emergent system without even knowing about it. And this actually happens fairly frequently in small work groups where all of a sudden people start working together without a leader. There may actually be a technical leader present, but that person is simply another worker, another interchangeable unit. When they all recognize the same goal, they all recognize the same basic rules and regulations, when the roles are relatively interchangeable, they're all sharing information, you can start seeing people working in an emergent way without recognizing even what emergence is. I saw a lot of this when I was doing consulting work for the Bureau of Maintenance here in Portland many years ago, where when I went out on the work crews, I would actually see the crew working without waiting for orders to come from above. They knew what they had to do, they knew what the routine was, and they would work together and work through novel situations they had never faced before, in such a way that again, not waiting for orders from above, but letting the solutions emerge from within them. Level 2 of the emergent system is people who understand an emergent system and understand that what they're doing could become an emergence. Now, what we will be working to stimulate is a level 3, where we're trying to create emergent systems. We're trying to do things in an emergent way. Um, and then Johnson says there's a fourth level where you start getting a collective intelligence. Now, if you pay attention to computer science, they talk a lot about artificial intelligence, where a computer becomes as intelligent as a person. Um, this is, to me, way, way, way far in the future, to the point of maybe we shouldn't even be talking about it. But the idea of collective intelligence, I think, is something that we can have experience with right now. And many people talk about having an experience of collective intelligence, of a mass intelligence, or intelligence that is part of them, but is greater than them. I believe that this is a definite relationship to our spirituality. I also think it's a definite relationship to what Sheldrake talks about in terms of morphogenetic fields. And I think that all of this is pointing us in a direction where we can become um, larger than our ego selves. And when we do that, and when we're tied into are simple rules that are part of how we live on our planet, and not my own personal wants and wishes. How all of us can become one with the web of life, and not just the group that I can identify with. That these become things that start pointing us to a new way to be human beings, and a new way to be beings on a living planet. So now I'd like us to talk about a few human examples of emergence. We talked about bees, we talked about uh, termites, etc. I think it's time for us to talk about humans. And I think it's time for us to look at what examples we have, especially in our modern time, of what an emergence can look like. So here we go. The first example I want to give you is the example of the people power revolutions that swept Eastern Europe and other parts of the world back in the 90s. In these situations, people in very different circumstances came together by the millions to kick out their old governments and install new ones. Um, the one that I want to highlight in particular is the Orange Revolution that took place in Kiev in the Ukraine. In that one, a million people came out in sub-freezing weather and stayed out on the streets for 6 weeks while the old government crumbled and the new one came took place. The idea that people, regular human beings, could come together and literally bring the entire country to a halt and stay out on the streets for 6 weeks in sub-freezing weather and self-organize how all that happened. Where did the food come from? Where did the bathroom facilities, the sleeping facilities for 1 million people for 6 weeks come from? Well, it was completely self-organized. This was beyond any of the political parties to even monitor, let alone try to control. While all this was going on, I had a friend who was actually in the group, in the crowd, in Kiev at that time. And he was sending emails back to us of how absolutely remarkable the group was and how the group came together. And here's what he says in one of his emails. I'm not going to read the entire 4 pages of the email to you. I'm going to hit some of the highlights, though. On this page, he says, "This is one of the most incredible experiences of my entire life to be here during this time." This really was a momentous undertaking and a momentous event for him. This is the heart of Michael's letter. "It's difficult to describe what's going on here. No news coverage on your TV screens. No pictures can express the feeling of being surrounded by a million people. The most amazing thing, which I believe will have worldwide sociological implications for a long time to come, is how incredible is this crowd. This is the happiest, friendliest, incredibly loving and supportive group of people I have ever encountered, except it's about a million people in this group. According to the mayor's office in the city of Kiev, there are no reports of any crime in this huge metropolitan area. The crime has stopped. Everyone is a friend. Everyone is a neighbor." This is the kind of thing that's an offshoot of what happens when people form true community. So that when you have had that community feeling with a group of people, I think that that's a sign that what you're looking at is an emergence. What you're looking at is something that is coming together in a very powerful way. The notion that a group of people is taking care of themselves is, I think, very important. He goes on to explain. "It is cold out there. Most of the nights the temperature gets well below 0 centigrade. There are mountains of warm clothes everywhere on the main street, which were donated by Kievites. Food, hot coffee, hot tea are abundant and free everywhere. But you do not see any alcohol. This is the most sober 1 million Ukrainians you will ever meet. The crowd is completely self-organizing and improving its collective behavior continuously. We are in the middle of one of the greatest experiments in crowd behavior in human history." Now, without using the language of emergence, he's describing a human emergence. No one knows where the food comes from. No one knows where the blankets or the clothes come from. Each person is an independent actor. But each one of them, because they're going by looking at their local neighbors, they're sharing local information, one end of that 1 million crowd can't even see the other end of the 1 million crowd. So there's nobody coordinating the behavior. But what people are doing is by looking at each other and then finding how they are moved to act. I was talking to one woman who had been in the crowd, and she said every once in a while she would make 20 or 30 sandwiches, and she'd go out and she'd carry them out on a platter, and as people were hungry, they'd take a sandwich. If they weren't hungry, they wouldn't take a sandwich. She'd walk into the crowd until it was until the sandwiches were gone. And she might not do that every day. She might do that every few days or so. But in that way, by individual actors taking individual responsibility, the collective whole was able to stay very warm, very well fed, etc. And I want to make one point about that he says that there's no alcohol in the crowd. I don't want to cast disparaging remarks toward any group of people, but the idea that you get a million Eastern Europeans coming out at night and having no alcohol was amazing to the point of being a miracle. And I really think that it was a sign that there's something else going on, which brings us back to the morphogenetic fields. I could say a lot more about the Orange Revolution and the implications for a large-scale emergence. However, I want to switch gears slightly. You remember in our affirmations we've been talking about uh, being pledged to a sustainable emergence. So when the people of the Ukraine went out on the streets, they stayed there 6 weeks until Yushchenko became the president. Then those million people all went home and all started living their ordinary lives, and Yushchenko turned out to be a very typical and not very good politician. Um, what would happen if the uh, the emergence just simply kept going, where people continue to take care of themselves, take care of each other, people continue to live their lives, but again in a leaderless, distributed way, not in a top-down way? Are there any examples of a long-term sustainable emergence? And as it turns out, there are. Several years ago, I was in the beautiful city of Heidelberg, Germany, and at the city is dominated by its central cathedral. The back of the cathedral is interesting because it's a town square there, and every Wednesday and every Saturday morning there's a farmer's market there. The farmer's market's been behind the cathedral on Wednesdays and Saturdays for 900 years. It was this farmer's market was there when that part of Germany was part of France. It was there through both world wars. And the thing about it is no one runs the farmer's market. Now, in the market, the different vendors line up according to what they're vending. So the cheese vendors will be in one area, the greengrocers will be in another area, and the people selling arts and crafts will be in a third area. But there's no one to tell them that they're which way to line up. There's no one to tell them to be there Wednesday and not Thursday. There's no one judging the size of their stall or anything like that. It is a completely self-organizing market, and that as an emergence has been self-organizing for 900 years. So, is it possible for us to govern ourselves? The answer is yes. Is it possible for us to govern ourselves along emergent principles? The answer is yes. Is it possible for us to govern ourselves along emergent principles for a very long time, for hundreds and hundreds of years, perhaps a whole millennia? The answer is right before us, and the answer is yes. So that's why I get really excited about the possibilities of emergence. That's what I believe is happening right now, and that's what we are doing through the methodologies that we're using to strengthen the existence and the possibilities of emergence in the world. The regrounding for those of you who knew about it already. There's a lot more that's possible to study. You can read Stephen Johnson's book with the title Emergence. You can read Peggy Holman's book. There are lots of people who have been studying this phenomena and applying it to computer science and other things like that. We're studying it to apply it to societal transformation and transforming our present society into a world that works for all. I think that you can see the possibilities that come from that, and to me the possibilities are really exciting. And we'll be talking about this and a lot of other things a lot more. Okay, thanks a lot for watching this, and talk to you later. Bye.